Hello, everybody. I am back. I'm Chelsea Ohlemiller, and I'm so glad to be back with our Grief and Goodbyes series for Facebook Live. And tonight I have a very special guest. It is.
Are you there?
Stories and everything kind of meshed together. And so I am super excited to introduce Charlotte Donlon. And she is not only a writer herself, she is also a spiritual leader for writers. So we're going to be talking to her about that because I know I have a lot of writers in the audience. And she is the author of The Great Belonging, How Loneliness Leads to Each Other, which I know we will all want to ask her some questions about her expertise on writing about that. And so I am just super excited to have you on, and welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. And I want to say a few seconds ago, I kind of lost you. So
okay,
if I went, are you there? That was me making sure you are still there. So I think we're good now.
Perfect.
But thanks so much for having me. It's so good to be with you. And I look forward to our conversation.
Yes. So I know you wrote your book in 2020, I believe. Is it your very first book?
Yes, that was my very first book. And I started writing it in winter of 2018.
Okay.
And then, it was published last November.
Right. And so it obviously speaks to loneliness, and what a great time that it came out in 2020 because we've never been lonelier. You know, I just feel like the world hit a new level of lonely during the pandemic and grief and all of that. And so what do you feel about the timing? Do you think it kind of worked out perfectly? And what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I was pretty disappointed when I learned my published date was going to be 1 week after the election. So this was before the pandemic. This was in 2019, I believe, when they told me my pub date. And, I was like, can we do it before or after? Because that's probably not a great time.
That's true.
No one's going to care about my book, right? And then the pandemic hit. And I was like, oh God, now it's like the election and a pandemic, and what a terrible time to publish a book. But then everyone, in my circle and writer friends and my publisher were, really encouraging about the content, about the topic, that it was needed. And I had been pretty separated from the book manuscript by the time we were getting ready for publication. I hadn't really read it for several months. So I began to reread it after the pandemic began, I want to say in May-ish. And it was just really good to see how it might be helpful for readers in ways that I never had imagined when I started writing the book. I had always hoped that it would meet readers who struggle with loneliness in different ways. And I believe there are all different types of loneliness, and we experience it in all different types of ways. But to then see it meet people in the very specific sort of loneliness that came during quarantine and, even afterward with the different sorts of experiences during the pandemic was really, it was good. I mean, I hate that it was needed for that, but it's been wonderful hearing feedback from readers and, from people who have found comfort in the book. So yeah, It's not what I expected, but it's been good.
Yes. And what I love is that I read so many of the reviews for the book, and the common theme from everybody was that it helped them understand that loneliness is not something to be, necessarily fearful of, or it's not this big problem, but it's in fact just something that we're going to live with and learn how to live with it. And it struck me because I thought that's exactly what grief is. It's not real. I mean, it is a problem. We don't want to have it, but at the same time, it can teach us things, and, it's something that we have to learn to live with, whether we, enjoy that aspect or not. And so I saw those two just so cohesive together. And I don't know, if you probably thought of that before, but in seeing all of those, that's what I took away from it. And so I'm curious to know, well, we can talk about your grief story too, but I'm curious to know what led your heart to, start writing on loneliness and how that kind of became your path.
Yeah. So, I submitted a few book proposals to write books before I submitted this one. And one of those book proposals, I sent it to a publisher. The acquisitions editor loved it. He was like, let me take it to my team. Long story short, it was no, but they kind of fought about it. Like there was yays and nays. And when he told me no, he said, we don't know what to do with you. Like and I was like it wasn't the rejection, because I had books rejected before, but it was this idea that there wasn't space for me in my writing. So I'm a Christian, and this was with a Christian publisher, and it's like my writing is too kind of mainstream for Christian publishers and too kind of faith-ish for mainstream publishers. At least that's how I felt, and I felt like there was no room for me. And that was when I put words around the fact that it made me feel very lonely and alone and isolated as a writer and in my faith. So as I explored that response to that acquisitions editor and that whole process, I just began to read and write and think about loneliness. And then I began to realize, oh my goodness, this is that thing that I've struggled with my whole life. So, I started at that point in time and then worked my way back. And in the book, I write about some of my earlier memories of loneliness. And then when I followed the threads, it's just kind of something that I realize has different meanings and different definitions and different, like I said before, people experience it in different ways. Yet it's something we don't talk about, like grief. I think, there are these topics and feelings and emotions that we all experience, but it's kind of taboo to be honest about it. So thank you for your work while I'm here on grief and, having honest conversations and being vulnerable about how you experience grief. The more we talk about these things, the less power they have over us.
Yes.
And the more the more connected we are to each other. So
absolutely. Well, and same to you, because, we all, it's something, like you said, that no one really talks about, but it's a universal experience. Loneliness is that universal experience that everybody feels at some point, and they may not feel it all the time every day, but they feel it sometime, and for some of us, it's, only feeling lonely when we're by ourselves. But there are so many other ways to feel lonely when you're in a crowd of 1,000 people, and just inside of your own soul. And so it's interesting to hear you talk about it in the writing world, because that's kind of where I am now as a writer, trying, taking my dreams and putting them out there. But you do feel a little lonely because you're like, what is the space for me? And, how do we do this? And so I'm so glad that we connected, because I have a million questions for you for different days about things. So, but I know you yourself have dealt with grief and loss, with the loss of your mother-in-law recently, and also your father from COVID. And so how have you found yourself, kind of dealing with all of that? And, how are you coping?
Yeah. Well, I've been pretty good at grieving, lamenting, sorrowing, since I was in my late 20s. So I grew up not really processing those emotions. Everything was okay. Even when things weren't okay, we acted like everything was okay. And then when I became a mother, I was just, more aware of things that were wrong in the world and in the church. And we experienced some drama at a church we were at. And I went to a therapist, and he was like, do you cry about bad things? And I was like, no. So all of that to say, I'm very thankful that by the time my dad died, I was acquainted with grief. I knew what it was like to grieve over things that were worthy of grief. And So when he died, I like jumped into it. You know, I was a wreck for a while. Like the first week was very difficult. It felt like my heart was actually going to break, you know, like physical.
Yep.
It was just the weight of all of it. And a friend of mine, she told me, you know, the first week she lost her mother. She was like, by day 7 or 8, you'll feel better. By day 30, you'll feel better. After 3 months, you'll feel better. Today is actually the 11-month mark from when my dad died.
Oh my goodness.
And I will say that it was super hard. And I've become more comfortable with it. So the grief comes and I write it, you know, whether it's tears or not tears, you know, I can actively grieve while I'm not crying, you know, like
Yep.
I'm sure I can express it or experience it in many different ways. So I'm kind of rambling about all this, but
No.
I guess I would say that and we mentioned this before we went live, like when you lose a parent, you become a member of this club that you really wish you didn't have to be a member of, but you're surrounded by people who understand, you know, people who, once you've lost a parent, like you understand something that those who haven't understand. So I am thankful for the people who I know who were able to have empathy for me and my situation. And then even unfortunately since then, a dear friend lost her father, and then my husband, his mother died a few weeks ago. And it's been good to be able to be present to them in a way that I wouldn't have been able to be present in if my dad hadn't died.
Yep.
So do I miss my dad? Yes. Do I wish he was still here? Yes. Is life still worth living? Yes. Like there's still really great things in life and relationships and my memories of my dad and my relationship with my mom and my family. So it's, you know, I don't want to be that person that's like, silver linings make everything bad go away. That's not true. Like it's horrible and I'll always be sad about my dad's death. But it has been interesting to see how the grief has grown me in different areas and how, like the idea, sorry, I'm definitely rambling, but the connections between loneliness and grief have been super interesting too. So, I never knew how lonely grief is from the standpoint of like, I'm grieving my dad's death in a way that no one else can grieve it.
Right.
I'm his only daughter. And I'm a unique human being. So like that element of the loneliness of grief is something I had never thought about until my dad died. And I was like, this is terrible because no one, even though I have friends who've lost parents and my brother lost his dad too, like I'm alone in this because this is my grief to carry. Like, and it's different from everyone else's. And it's very isolating in a way. So did you experience that when your mom died, like the loneliness
Absolutely.
of it? Okay.
Yes. And I'm glad that you mentioned your brother because I have a younger sister. It's just the two of us. And even, you know, like you said, we're both grieving the same mother, but our grief was exponentially different. Even today, you know, we just hit the 4-year mark on July 3rd. So this was a last weekend, you know, everybody's celebrating the holiday and it, for us was one of the worst weekends, you know, it just, it brings up a lot of emotion, but yeah, it is loneliness, you know, and my husband unfortunately lost his mother before I had met him. And so he has grieved a mother too, but it's just so unique, you know, it's like as unique as the purses everybody carries around is grief, you know, they could be the same size, but they don't look alike. They're nothing, you know, it's just not the same. And so we definitely experienced that. And it's funny because, you know, like loneliness, there are sometimes when there's so many people there that are saying, you know, we got so many messages over the weekend that said, I'm praying for you. I'm praying for you. And yet we still felt a little lonely, you know, just like this is what it is. So, yeah, absolutely. I think the two go together. And I love that you keep saying like, oh, I'm rambling because you're not rambling. That's what grief is. You have like a million speech bubbles at all the time, and it's anger and it's confusion and it's sadness and it's all these things together. And so when you do have to talk about it, it's like, where do I begin? Which emotion do you want? You say grief, which is a really easy word to say, but it's not, it's so many other things.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. That just gave me freedom that you will never, I mean, you probably do understand it. Thank you for explaining that to me, because it's totally what it's like. And it is why, like, I probably need an outline of what I want to talk about when I talk about grief, or a book that you're going to write one day about it. So yeah, thank you for clarifying that. That is what it's like. It's like it's so much bigger than just that one word.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And I did forget to say this at the beginning. Usually I say it, but if anybody that's watching has any questions or comments, we will go through and read those. So make sure that you let us know if you have any questions. And I see that my professor is on, and she said that it's a terrible club, but it's so good to realize that we aren't alone. And she's absolutely right. Yes. Hi, Professor Willie.
Hi. And I will say, the maneuver I did was to plug in my computer. I'm getting low, and I didn't realize it wasn't plugged in, but I'm good now.
Oh, it's fine.
I will not lose power while I'm here.
And then I was going to read, Carolyn said, so sorry for your losses, but thank you both for sharing your experience, sending hugs. And so I don't know if you've experienced this, but like you said, there has been meaning in the loss, and that there is still beauty left. And the community of people, when I write and I put it out there, people will say, yes, I feel that same way, but I didn't know how to say it, or I felt like that, but nobody was saying that that's kind of normal. And so I will say that the empathy and sympathy and just kindness and compassion from people that have experienced the kind of loss that we have, there is this just immediate like friendship and, kinship of love and kindness, because I think once you experience this depth of loss, you just have a new way to relate to people and experience, empathy in a way that you couldn't before.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, that's another kind of connection or similarity between grief and loneliness too, is, and then the shame, I'll just bring this up with regard to, I don't experience shame with regard to grief, except maybe I did when I was younger, when I wasn't able to admit like that bad things happen and it's worthy of grief. But with loneliness, there's a lot of shame. And in one of Brene Brown's books, I can't remember which one, she talks about how when you name the thing, like you just say, I'm lonely or I'm grieving and it's terrible, it just frees you from the shame, and it helps you connect with other people. And then when we are vulnerable, it invites others to be vulnerable. And then we feel less alone because they're sharing their stories. So it is this kind of contagious thing that I appreciate when people are willing to name it, to name the hard things and the difficult emotions and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. And sometimes, it's, you don't know what it is, like I'm grieving. Right. I don't know what else it is. It could be anger. It could be frustration. I don't know, it's a million different things. So I wanted to ask you, so you're a spiritual leader for writers and a certified spiritual director for writers. And so how do you come about that path, and what does that involve?
Yeah. So I earned an MFA in creative writing late in life. So I'm 46, and I graduated from an MFA program in 2018. And then I had a spiritual director for several years and waited until I finished that degree to get trained to be a spiritual director. And my husband was like, we're spending more money. And I said, yes. So then I, within months, began training to become a spiritual director. And when I was in training, I began my practicum meeting with clients, and it turned out that like they were all writers. And I think it's just because it's people I knew, and I put it in my MFA Facebook group, and they were like, yeah. So, most of them were writers. And that just kind of turned into being a spiritual director for writers. And another reason I am focusing on that particular practice is I can get really interested and curious about all different kinds of things. But my primary vocations are writer and spiritual director. So it's like, if I can be a spiritual director for writers, that's bringing together, those two vocations and passions even more. So it just helps me. I mean, it's kind of a selfish thing so that I can continue to hone in on what I'm good at and what I enjoy. And I really enjoy meeting with writers, and it looks different for each client.
Yeah.
My primary role as a spiritual director is to help my clients notice how God has been present in their life. So that's the simplest definition. And when I meet, it's about an hour, and I do a lot of listening and ask questions, and we usually land somewhere that no one expected, like from a conversation and insight standpoint.
Right. So does that help you, like refresh your soul while you're helping others and guiding them kind of on a faithful path that is, creative and inspiring and all of these things? Do you find it fills your cup too?
Oh, definitely. Yes. I tell people often, I'm like, I feel like more of who God made me to be when I'm practicing spiritual direction with my clients. And I would say that's also true when I'm writing. So, when I'm doing both of those things, I definitely feel like more of myself, and definitely feel nourished through that work.
Yeah. Do you ever find yourself giving a client advice or encouragement or tips, and then you leave thinking, I think like I need to do those things too?
Yes, I try not to do that. So that is a lot of what we're trained to do, is to pray while we're listening and try to take ourselves out of the equation. What I find usually is that clients have similarities. So, when the pandemic started, all of my clients were kind of experiencing some of the same things. And that was another kind of situation where I needed to be thoughtful and be like, well, just because this client said this, I didn't want to hear things that client wasn't saying.
Right.
But there are kind of similarities and seasons where people kind of experience some of the same things. And then with many of my clients who are writers, just each session looks different. Like, some people want to talk literally about writing and like from a more practical standpoint. And then we may do spiritual direction where we talk about how God's present in their creative work for just like part of the session. Or we may have a session where, there's not much writing talked about at all, but, our creativity infuses every area of our life. So it's all kind of wrapped up in there anyway.
Yeah. Well, I love that. I kept going back to that and thinking I hadn't heard of, that particular thing, avenue for writers. And so I just was super inspired by that and thought that's such a great way to fuse both, your creativity and your spiritual side and all of those things. And so I'm trying to keep up with the comments. So let's see. Carrie said, when I lost my mom, I felt shame because I wasn't able to be with her anymore. 2 months of withdrawal from reality, and I find myself in a hospital for a week, 6 more, and a therapist, and I switched to a new therapist that helped me face my shame or guilt. And so, yeah, I think, and you can speak to that too. One, I love Brene. I love that you mentioned Brene Brown because she is one of my favorite people. Her and Glennon Doyle are like right up there for me. But yeah, I know that, shame is we have shame of everything. We have shame of our loneliness and our grief. And so what do you ever have any advice that, for clients or even friends that are dealing with shame and not really knowing how to get past that?
Yeah. I mean, I think I mentioned it before, but I mean, the best thing for me for shame and for my clients is to literally say out loud the thing with someone you trust. Don't say it out loud to someone who's not going to receive you well or someone who's not safe.
That's a great point.
And, I also live with mental illness. So I have bipolar disorder. which was diagnosed in 2007. And at that point, I began being very honest. I mean, I think that's why it's so easy for me to talk about loneliness and other things, because when that happened, and like everyone in my church and in my neighborhood knew that I was in a psychiatric hospital, I was like, okay, I can either pretend like this didn't happen, which wouldn't work out very well, right?
Right.
Because everyone knew it had happened, or I can be honest about it and vulnerable about it, and invite people into what it's like to live with depression and mania and bipolar disorder. So I think that was kind of practice for me to begin speaking up about things and noticing how the shame dissipates. And I also see it as a privilege, to talk honestly and openly about mental illness, especially, and loneliness and even grief, because a lot of people can't be honest about those things for various reasons, and maybe perfectly good reasons. Maybe there are some family issues or a job situation, or I don't know. I mean, there could be many different reasons that people can't speak up and be honest and vulnerable about what they're struggling with. So when I do have an opportunity to do it, I see it as a privilege and an honor to be able to do that. And I try not to really judge others who can't for whatever reason, because I don't know their story.
Right.
And then I do think when we are open about it, people are invited into that space, even if they can't talk about it,
Right. Yep. That's a perfect point. And I think too, I know with me, I went to a therapist after my mom passed away. It took me a while to get to one, but I think it's just like, a friendship or this unique relationship, and you have to really find somebody that is a good fit, and, that you blend well together, because, you want to have a safe place where you feel like the advice is, well received, and that you feel comfortable and all of those things. So it's just such a delicate space,
Yeah. And to anyone who is struggling with shame and they don't know who to talk to, I mean, a therapist is always a great option. They're there to listen and support you, and literally like saying the words out loud. I don't know, it's a mysterious thing. Maybe, I don't know how it all works. I'm sure there are explanations that scientists have, but it really does help. So if you don't know someone in your circles, a friend or family member who you're comfortable with saying something out loud to, I'm a fan of therapy.
Yep, me too. And just, like we even use that with our kids. I think even when you say, the exact emotion, like, oh, I'm sorry you're feeling angry right now, but, how can we move forward with this? And just naming it. And then you kind of are like, okay, yeah, that's when I am feeling angry, or I am feeling. And of course that doesn't work if like your spouse is telling you that. But, if you're telling it to yourself or even your kids, I found that does work. And so that's a beautiful point that you bring up, is to name the thing that's, weighing you down.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I also, we haven't mentioned yet, but you are the founder of the Art and Faith Collective. And so you do several different things, and you're still joining all of those avenues. So I want to make sure that everyone knows, I will put all of the links to Charlotte's website, to her social media, and all of that, a place you can buy her book. It's right there. I'll put all the links in the comments. So it'll be super easy for you guys to find her and find her book, and all of those things. And so, yeah, do you have anything else you want to share, or any last?
Well, I mean, I feel like I could talk to you for hours for all of this. Are there any more
I was trying to look
comments that we can respond to quickly?
Let's see. Professor Whitley said that she switched therapists, and that it was super helpful for her. And that's another thing I always tell people. I had someone email me the other day and say, I went to therapy like, you said you did, and I hated it and it was awful. And I'm like, well, it took me several before I found the right one. And I kind of had to research. And so don't get discouraged. Make sure you find somebody that works for you. Carrie said that she recovered from the loss of her dad quicker than she did her mom. And she had her mom still when we lost dad, and she went to be with him in 2000. So yeah. And that's another thing, Carrie, is that each loss too is just so unique between the relationship that you have and all of those things. And so, it's just such a complex and special thing. So, and yes, and they're kind of just talking to each other, I think, a little bit. Yeah. There's some that keep popping up, but yeah. So
everyone who's watching and interacting,
yes, and this comments, and the video will save, so you guys can come back and watch it at a different time, and it'll be here if you want to come back and jot down some of the awesome things that Charlotte has said. So yeah, I just want to thank you so much, and I definitely am so glad that Professor Whitley led me into your path, because I've truly been inspired by your work and just your heart and all the work that you've been doing. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. It's so good to talk to you, and I look forward to seeing how your work continues to unfold. And thanks again for helping others who have experienced grief know that they aren't alone in it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you so much. Bye, everybody. We'll see you. I'll see you guys all tomorrow for my next guest, who I'm super excited about, tomorrow at 4. Thank you.
Bye.